Today, I'm just doing a studio chat. I'm back in the studio. I have a ton of projects on my table here, and I've just been really creatively engaged lately. So, thought it was time to just do a little update on Low and just an update on my creative life in general. For most of 2025, I was pretty burned out on game development and I was burned out on playing games too. I just kind of stepped away from games altogether. I decided to just sink my teeth into something brand new and just try to learn how to build little microprocessors and little motor controllers and program them to do things that I want using Arduino Megas and these little motor shields and Wi-Fi shields. If you assemble it correctly and program it correctly, you can do some really powerful things. I sort of saw model railroading as a great laboratory or test bed for my interest in electronics. Thinking about the game again, thinking more and more about Low and how I really need to get back into it and try to solve the problems that I have with it. In my last update on Low, I was talking about how I was revamping all the dice mechanics. I was going from a 1d6 system to dice pools. At first, I was using these homemade dice sets, and that was working pretty good, and it was modeling a lot of the stuff that I was trying to model with it. I even played around with some super special custom dice. These custom dice are just kind of limiting, so I really still like the idea of dice pools, but I'm not crazy about custom dice. And I also just felt like as I was emulating what it would be like to play with these, it just felt a little too much like a slot machine, and I'm just looking for the pretty symbol. You know, the original 1d6 system had a little too much cognitive load because you had to store the number in your head. These dice pools with these custom dice, especially the ones with the icons, didn't have enough cognitive load. It was just a little too spoon-fed. So then I was like, okay, well, how can I keep the dice pools but get away from these custom dice? There's how many dice you're going to roll, and that usually will come down to your an attribute like strength or agility or stealth or wisdom. And then there's what is the success you need for each die. So that's going to be a 2 plus, 3 plus, 4 plus, 5 plus. And then the third and final thing is how many successes do you need? Usually you only need one success. So I think between like number of dice, the success to hit number, and then the number of successes you actually need basically covers all the bases. And then you can still play around with crit success and crit fails. This is back when I was still using counters for everything. But then looking everything up in the rule book all the time was a pain. So I needed these player aids to basically decrypt what you're seeing here. And you've got your upgrades listed on one side and all your weapons, your starting equipment listed on the other side. And, you know, all of this actually worked. Like nothing was broken about this, but frankly, it's pretty fiddly. There's a lot of setup and teardown time. These are all the counters, and just there was a lot of sorting of counters. It doesn't really scale nicely. So then in the last version of the game that I never really shared publicly, but I was working on pretty hard, I took all the counters and converted them to cards. And so that kind of got the whole system down to from all this down to this, because all this stuff could be explained on individual cards now. This system is a lot more expandable, a lot more scalable, because if I want new items, I just need new card decks. Yeah, it's kind of sad to let go of these cool counters. I really am pleased with my counter design, but this just makes more sense. So that became this. But one thing I realized with all the playtesting I've ever done, all the starting equipment here almost never gets dropped during play. So if you're playing the fighter and he's got a great sword, all the games that we played, there was not a single game where the warrior ever left his greatsword behind or took off his chainmail. There is a situation in the first scenario where if you get captured by the cultists, you can get overrun by cultists, captured and imprisoned. And when that happened, you would lose all of your gear. They would take your chainmail off. They would take your greatsword. So it is possible to lose your items. And so that got me thinking about like, how could I eliminate like all this starting gear? And it got me thinking about like, what if I baked the reference cards into the hero cards? And I'm not sure if I'm going to do this, but I've been working pretty hard on it just to see if it's feasible, just to see if it works. So basically all this was reduced to this, and then this is getting reduced to this. And I don't think that I'm losing any functionality. I need to test it. All right, so how does the new hero card work? The warrior has all of this gear, and anything that's not currently in a hand is considered stowed. So if he's got the greatsword, you basically just do that. And he's holding the greatsword. His dagger is stowed, the torch is stowed. Let's say he starts with 5 meat, indicating that he's got 5 meat. And there's a little damage space here for the helmet. So the biggest change is how vitals work and how the stat tracker works. So in the old system, there were 3 vital stats: health, will, and sanity. Those go down the track, and if any one of them got below 1, then the hero's incapacitated. I really like the idea of having 3 separate vital stats because it kind of allows for some interesting strategies. Some heroes are more vulnerable to monsters that prey on sanity or will. Some heroes are more vulnerable to objective hazards and monsters that only damage you physically. So I wanted to keep the 3 vital stats, but thing is, you've got 3 counters here times 4 heroes. That's 12 vital stat counters. The stat tracker takes up a lot of real estate. Once again, it all works, but it's kind of fiddly. All right, so with the new system, there is 1 vital stat, and it's just called life points. But there are 3 aspects to that stat. There's still health, sanity, and will. Each hero is going to start with their life points maxed out. Let's say the hero takes 2 health damage. You would just go 1, 2, because he's got the health aspect across all these columns. Now, let's say the hero takes 2 sanity damage. So that's the first point of damage. And then you roll back around and you would land on the second sanity icon here. So that's your second. And then every time you roll back around, you decrease this by 1. So that 4 now becomes a 3. So when he takes sanity damage, his life points drain faster than if he takes health damage. And now let's say he takes 2 will damage. We go 1, slide down, 2. When this tracker token gets down to 1, you're kind of on your last leg. And when the 1 reaches the end, you're down to 0. You're incapacitated. You can use dice here. 1, 2, 3. Circle back around, and then you turn that to a 1. But I was really just trying to figure out how to reduce the footprint so that the vast majority of the hero stuff can just live on these single cards. Where this really starts to shine is if you're playing with, 3 or 4 heroes. You can actually control all their gear and all their vitals in a very small footprint. And that is very appealing to me, instead of having like a sprawling hero card stat tracker reference cards for all 4 heroes, which really bloats the footprint of the game. So basically all of these starting gear cards have just been replaced with baked in starting gear. And that frees me up to either have fewer assets or include way more artifacts and special items and treasures, now that I don't have to like micromanage all the starting gear anymore. There's still going to be item cards because there's still going to be special items. And let's say the warrior finds the lost sword. Well, now you've got the lost sword, and if you want to equip the lost sword and you place that here. Now, I just want to reiterate that I need to play test all this a lot. It may be that the stat tracker ends up being way too fiddly. I think there's a way that I can get it dialed in so that it's not fiddly. I may need a special counter for the stat tracker so that the 4, 3, 2, 1 is all on one counter, and you just rotate it or you flip it over. I think digging out numeric counters for that stat tracker counter is going to be annoying. I also want to have multiple characters of each class. So, this warrior is the great sword warrior, and then there'll be another warrior that'll be like a knight maybe with a shield and plate mail, and then there'll be a barbarian with the battle hammer. And then I'm also going to provide a pad of blank character sheets so that advanced players can create their own. So I'm hoping that doing away with all these unnecessary starting gear cards, I can add a lot more artifacts, treasures, potions, that type of thing. Because this is not interesting. This is interesting. No, you've got a great sword, and it's a badass sword. But there's also way cooler swords out there to get, like the Power Blade or the Lost Sword. Now, I have spent an enormous amount of time developing what I think is the perfect map tile system, and I'm not going to do away with it. I really love my map tiles. I'm not ditching that, but I am thinking a lot about map tiles. And one of the issues that I'm having with these square tiles is that they're nice and modular, but they're almost too modular. And I went with a 7/8 inch square because it allowed me to fit 4 squares on a single 3.5 by 3.5 inch card. So these map squares are smaller than almost any other dungeon crawler. So I have been thinking about ways to make my squares 1 inch instead of 7/8 inch. Just so people can use their own miniatures. I mean, if you already have like a bunch of 28mm zombies, it would be super cool if my game was compatible with all the miniatures that everybody already owns. And this is just a test. These will be painted just like the other ones, and they'll be colorful just like the other ones. But these are 1 inch squares, and size wise the N-scale figures work really well with it, but these are 1 inch squares, so normal miniatures are going to work just fine with it too. So this large tomb right now requires 2 of these square cards, but you could potentially fit the entire large tomb on a single card. I think there's something about these square cards that is just a little too modular. Like they're just never big enough to make for interesting ranged combat. They're never quite big enough to allow for interesting chases. Like you're always chasing the monster off the card immediately, or the monster's always just like in your face the second you lay the card down. There's just not enough room for action to emerge in a space. I'm just curious. I want to do some playtesting and see if it just allows for more different types of action to occur when you place a card. And this may be a dead end. I may back out of this, and I'm definitely not going to ditch this. At the very least, I'll incorporate the two. Digging into some work I did on the game, like at this point years ago, but these are old hero cards. This was the very first like prototype version of the game. There was a barbarian and a ranger, a hermit, a monk, a sorcerer. So kind of want to reincorporate some of this old stuff back into the game now that I have a little more wiggle room. That's the old cleric, and I may actually go back to the old cleric. I sort of like the old bald cleric for some reason. The old wizards, some of the stuff I'm still using. Assassin. These are the very first tile sets where it was a 4x4 grid. I wasn't splitting the edges like I do. I don't know, sometimes it's good to go back and sort of reassess decisions that have been made and just make sure that I'm still on the right track. I had like subterranean cave system and flooded passages and stuff. I had tight spaces and underground mazes of caverns. And it's kind of crazy how much time I spent on this stuff. I never once played a game with these cavern tiles, but yeah, I sure had a lot of them. Underground lakes, Swimming was going to be like a big feature of the game. Lava pits. Looking at some of these old monster cards because I kept pruning monsters because I wanted to save on counters. But now that I'm not using counters anymore for all the starting gear and all that stuff, or really for any of the gear, I just saved 12 more counters by getting rid of the vital stat tracking counters. I actually have a lot of wiggle room with counters. And what I really want to do is just reincorporate some of these old monsters that I pulled out of the game. I want to bring them back because I designed a lot of monsters. The old boar bear, bloodbats, tendrils, the frogmen. That's what this game needs. This game needs a lot more monsters, and it needs a lot more treasures. Just have like a really fun game with lots of monsters and lots of loot. And then lastly, as I've been getting back into game design and back into gaming, I have picked up a couple games this year, and I decided, since I'm still hyper focused on dungeon crawls, that I would continue my research into dungeon crawls. So I did pick up Hero Quest for the first time ever. I went with the smaller first light version of the game, and I have been having fun with it. There is an app, and it is possible to play this game solo using the app. So I've been doing that. I love the art. I love the overall vibe of the game. Mechanically, it's a little too simple for me. I wish there was a little more going on mechanically, but I understand that this is supposed to be kind of a beer and pretzels game, so I get it. It was fun to finally see what all the hype is about, because this game has gotten so much hype since it was re-released in the early 20s. And then this was sort of my Christmas present to myself this year. I found this used, but in very good condition. All the miniatures were assembled, but not painted, which is kind of perfect because I enjoy painting and I can pretty ambivalent about assembling this stuff. I've played through the first scenario and I really have enjoyed this so far. I've been building a little organizer for the miniatures because they're pretty fragile, and I bought this game used, and some of these miniatures came broken, which doesn't surprise me. I just need to get some plastic cement and do some repair on some of these, but everything's fixable. I've already primed the Knight Questor and I'm getting ready to paint him. It's got my paint set up over there, but yeah, I like painting miniatures. There's a lot more going on narratively with this game than I thought. There's actually a paragraph book, and there's a lot of flavor text and narrative breakpoints, but I feel like it really strikes a balance. Like it's just enough to create this really immersive experience, but it's not so much that you're grinding through lots of paragraphs of information. Anyway, a lot of people have done playthroughs and reviews on this game, so I'm not going to get into it. So I'm definitely not recommending that people rush out and buy this game, and honestly, I wouldn't really recommend anybody rush out and buy this game either. But I've personally really enjoyed exploring both of these games. This one has just been kind of a fun little afterthought, but this is something I've been sort of coveting for a while, and I was really on the fence about it. Don't really like big box games with lots of miniatures, and that's pretty much what Games Workshop is known for. That's what they do. But I gotta say, I think they really nailed the theme and the narrative and the immersion, and I really feel like this game does kind of transport me to a very bizarre world, and the mechanics are interesting and fun and nuanced, and yeah, I like it. I'm glad that it feels good to get back into game design, and it feels good to get back into gaming.